somebody should tell them this shit immediately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
you guys are telling them because they're listening right now to
okay,
what
are
you're
you?
saying. So
Oh, good.
we're in the chat and we have participants already here. Just so that you know, we're making sure that anybody who couldn't get in, because Zoom has somehow limited us to less than we paid for, they can still watch it on Facebook and still watch it on YouTube. And now that we're a few minutes in, I'm going to actually get started so that we can wrap things up within an hour because we have a lot to share. Um, my name is Paul Passimino. I am the Associate Director at Amazon Watch. I've been working with Amazon Watch since 2007 and in many other ways connected to this case and what's happened in Ecuador for many years prior to that. And I'm the host for today's event because Amazon Watch has been campaigning for 20 years to help try to achieve justice for the Ecuadorian people harmed by Chevron's deliberate poisoning of their environment. I want to give you a quick synopsis of that case and try to bring you up to speed of where we are today and then introduce our panelists. And what's happening now, and the reason we're having this now is because Stephen Donziger, who you can see on the screen, has been in home detention on house arrest for a year as of today. The number of ways that is completely unjust, unethical, outrageous, shocking, and unprecedented, we're going to go through with you. And you're going to hear things that sound to you, if you're a lawyer, if you're somebody concerned with human rights, if you're just a decent human being, that are going to shock you. And be prepared because it's pretty much flat out unbelievable what Chevron has been able to get away with. And it begins with the fact that in the 1960s, no oil company had ever drilled for oil in the Amazon before Texaco arrived in Ecuador in 1964. And that company went there, formed an agreement with a very US-friendly government at the time to drill for oil. And while doing so, over the course of decades, because they knew no one was watching and the only people that lived there were indigenous communities and other brown people from the South, deliberately polluted as a cost-saving measure. An estimated $3 a barrel would be saved if instead of putting the toxic waste from drilling oil back into the ground where it can safely be put after you drill for crude, they simply dumped it into close to 1,000 open, unlined pits throughout the Amazon and left an area about the size of the island of Manhattan full of toxic waste, carcinogens, and other chemicals that were deadly to the communities that lived there. And remember, they did this deliberately. They did this to save money. Their estimation was the lives of the people who lived there weren't worth $3 a barrel. And Texaco did this for years. After they finished their consortium with Ecuador in the early 90s, they left. And they left behind close to 1,000 pits. Now, knowing that there was going to be somebody looking at what had happened and they needed to figure out some kind of an arrangement, they formed a corrupt deal with the then government of Ecuador to give them $40 million to pay to clean up a portion of the 1,000 pits that they left behind. They estimated that they were only responsible for part of it because they had signed a consortium agreement with the government of Ecuador. However, they were the sole operator. They built the system, they operated the system, they dumped, and they told their employees to dump. So they were 100% responsible, but they decided to pay $40 million for remediation. That amounted to pushing dirt over a bunch of those pits. And they still remain today toxic and polluting and killing people. Yet at that point, Texaco wiped their hands of it and said, we're out. We don't need to worry about anything. And that's where Stephen comes in. Stephen and other lawyers went to Ecuador, saw what Texaco had done, and started a lawsuit against Texaco in New York. This was in the Second Circuit of Southern District of New York. Texaco fought that case for almost a decade. And their whole argument was, this case shouldn't be here. This case should be in Ecuador. They didn't want to be in front of a US court. They knew that they had deliberately caused a massive environmental crime and harmed people. So they successfully fought after years to have the venue moved back to Ecuador, saying that they would respect whatever decision the government and the courts in Ecuador came to, because at that point they were still incredibly friendly to the United States and oil companies. they allowed that, they brought that case back in Ecuador. At this point, Chevron acquired Texaco. It's the same company. And on the first day of the trial, when it restarted in Ecuador, they stood up and said, we shouldn't be here. We never operated here. We don't respect your right to tell us what to do, and we want out. So they never intended to accept any decision by Ecuador, the US, or anybody else. They've said, we don't want to be in court anywhere. We don't think we should be. This company believes and acts as if it's above the law. And what's so shocking today is we're going to hear about how the US government is reinforcing and helping that. They're solidifying their role as above the law and their ability to silence their critics and pollute without any kind of accountability. So the case in Ecuador went on, and despite the fact that Chevron didn't want it, they lost that case based primarily on their own evidence. They were found liable for $9.5 billion in 2011. In the meantime, they took out all their assets out of the country and said, we're not going to pay no matter what they tell us. We're going to fight this till hell freezes over, and we're going to fight it on the ice. Knowing that they had enough money to spend on lawyers, they could delay the inevitable forever, and they could literally wait until the people of Ecuador died trying to fight this, to get justice in this case. Right before that verdict was issued, and this is how we're getting to the fact that Stephen has been on house arrest for a year. Right before that verdict was issued in Ecuador, Chevron preemptively filed a retaliatory SLAPP lawsuit against Stephen and the other lawyers and some Ecuadorians in the United States, in the very same district that they went to sue Texaco in the beginning. And they successfully prevented the Ecuadorians from seeking access to justice in the United States by preventing any introduction of actual crime and suing under a RICO law with a friendly judge, Judge Lewis Kaplan, who helped them to orchestrate a SLAPP RICO lawsuit against Stephen Donziger and the others. And this judge has violated the First Amendment rights of many people, has threatened people, has intimidated people, has allowed Chevron to run roughshod over his courtroom and turned it into what some have called a Dickensian farce. Judge Lewis Kaplan allowed Chevron to sue the very people that it poisoned deliberately without looking at the act of poisoning them and permitting their evidence, their bribed witness, and their story. And that's why now Stephen Donziger is under house arrest, because he has stood up to Kaplan and the US judiciary and said, no, I'm not going to allow you to continue to violate the rights of myself and my clients. So Judge Kaplan continued to punish Stephen even after 2014 when they won their RICO case, and has been trying to get access to Stephen's computer, hard drive, cell phone, email passwords, to get that information, to give it to Chevron, and they will continue to intimidate and harass people who continue to fight for justice in Ecuador. And here's the important point here. There is still an opportunity and a path to justice for the people in Ecuador. It involves enforcing that Ecuadorian verdict anywhere else in the world other than the United States. And Chevron is vulnerable anywhere that it operates, where it holds billions of dollars in assets. And because that work hasn't stopped, Chevron is using its RICO verdict to silence Stephen, to imprison him in his home so he can no longer continue to work that, and to intimidate people from working with him. And this is why this is such an important message for activists like yourselves and for people concerned with climate justice, with the fossil fuel industry, and with justice in the United States, because it's because of his work within the law to pursue justice for the people of Ecuador that Chevron and Kaplan are working together to crush Stephen and keep him silenced and keep him alone. And for the most part, people don't know about this case. So what we want you to understand today is not only the context of what's happened in Ecuador, but why, in particular, the way Chevron has gone about suppressing the rights of Stephen and silencing him is such a serious threat to all of our work for corporate accountability and environmental justice in the United States. I know that's a long explanation. It's a challenge to try to explain that very quickly, and I apologize for taking too long, but it's incredibly important. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the history of it, I encourage you to go to chevrontoxico.com. And that's a website that will explain a little bit more chronologically and with some videos to tell you the background of the story. So without going too much further into that, I wanted to introduce our first panelist today. And Roger Waters, who I'm sure all of you know, a legendary musician, artist, and activist, has been involved in this case for some time. Roger went to Ecuador in 2018, and he was in the courtroom and saw what happened in Lewis Kaplan's courtroom and how he's attacked the rights of Stephen and others. So we're going to hear from Roger in a minute. And before we do, I want to share just a couple of minutes of an amazing video that he did when he was in Ecuador. So give me just 1 second because I need to make that full screen or it won't work well. Here we go. And then we'll hear from Roger right as soon as the video's done.
Back in 1967, when Texaco started drilling in this area, there was never any question of them caring what damage they did. In, out, take the oil, take the money and leave. That was and it still is the ethos of the major oil companies. Find somewhere where there's not a great deal of money going around. You can get in, you can give people jobs for a few years or a few months, and then you take everything that you can and leave. And that's what Texaco did here. And Chevron, who bought Texaco, own that debt to the people who live there. What's important about this case now is the future. It's for people to recognize the enormous courage and determination of these people to fight Chevron.
La piscina está allá. Por favor, diles que vengan para acá. Y me emocionó
So here it is.
cuando arribamos.
There is the evidence. Okay,
Esa es la
which we
evidencia.
see. The most important thing is that I met some of the lovely people here,
Lo más
which
importante
moved me deeply. This is a desperate situation, but we, activists around the world, are very proud of the Ecuadorian people fighting Chevron in the way that you are. And we will help you as much as we can until the fight is won. We have to understand that if we don't start embracing the idea of community, that all human beings have a responsibility to all other human beings. If we don't do that, we will destroy the whole fragile thing. We are now, so that's why we're here.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody, there's a link in the chat so you can watch the entire video. I really encourage you to do that. And you can also find it connected through Amazon Watch's pages as well. So Roger, take us through a little bit about your trip, what you've learned about this case, please, and how you see it as in your view as an activist, and what you saw, especially from Judge Kaplan, and how the U.S. judiciary is attacking the rights of Stephen and others who stand with him.
I will talk about my trip in a minute, but I can't see what there he is. That is the prick Kaplan. Look at him, sanctimonious prick, but also I think slightly deranged, also very, very corrupt. And we'll hear more about Lewis A. Kaplan later. I'll put him to one side. Yeah, the trip. Well, it was really kind of interesting. I was on tour. I was in Bogota in Colombia. We got on a plane to fly down just for the day, just to visit the site with Stephen. And first of all, we were told we couldn't land, so we circled for a bit. Eventually, we did land, and then we were told that we could not go to where I wanted to go. And so I sort of puffed up my chest a bit and had a few words with the assembled officials, and they got on the phone, and eventually they just caved in because it was Moreno and his henchmen and the government who decided that they were going to stop this little exercise of going into. That's kind of beside the point. Then they said, you can't take Donziger with you. You know, he's absolutely verboten. He's not allowed to travel in it. We don't like him. He's a troublemaker. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we went, and that was me talking to some lovely young Ecuadorian journalists, you know, by the side of the river. It was pouring with rain all day, and it was one of the most moving experiences of my life. we then went and we did press conferences, and Telesur, of course, covered it, and blah, 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 blah. So hopefully we had some effect locally. That sort of isn't really the point. You know, you were talking earlier about opening the channels so that people could watch this live on TV, and how difficult it is to cut through the technology of Zoom and the red tape of the blah, blah, blah. But hopefully I am now in your living room with you. So what I'd like to do, because I'm not accustomed to public speaking, is to imagine that we're sitting in a chair, if only I had a glass of cheap white wine, and just kind of talking. I want to go back to the beginning of my story. And I know somebody's going to tell me when I've been talking for too long, because I can ramble on. In 2012, which is only 8 years ago. So Paul, bless you, I've only been on this for 12 years. I know you've been on it for 20. So I caught up a little bit late. Anyway, in 2012, and it was a big year for me. I did a Russell Tribunal in New York. I spoke to the United Nations. I put on a fucking suit, right, and a tie to talk to the Human Rights Committee. So this is my touchstone. But also, I acted in a play, never acted before. It was called The Exonerated. And it was directed by Bob Balaban, and it was written by Jessica Blank and Eric Jensen. Anyway, it's about people who get banged up for crimes they haven't committed, and about their experiences on death row and their experiences with the American legal system, which, as we know, is completely broken, you know, and probably always has been. Certainly has been since the 13th Amendment, when that article was written into law in America. No man shall be held in indentured labor or slavery, save that he commit a crime, or whatever the wording is, which is a disgusting piece of legislation, which is why we still have slavery today. They call it the prison service, but it's slavery by any. Okay, I'm stopping rambling. At a dinner after the last performance of that play, Trudy Styler, who had taken the part that was played by a wonderful actress called Kathleen Chalfont for one night, said, "Do you want to go to dinner?" And I said, "Yeah, I like dinner. You know, I get hungry this time of night." So we bushed off to some posh restaurant, and who should be sitting at the table? Well, there were about 4 or 5 of us around the table. But Stephen, that's the first time I met him. So 2012. And we had a lovely dinner. And I said, "Well, you know, what do you do?" And so we started talking, and blah, 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 blah. And fuck me, 2 years later, he's in court because the guy whose picture I showed you earlier is in cahoots with Chevron, and the slap tactics that you've been speaking about came into operation. I sat in court and watched the kangaroos hopping around, because it was a kangaroo court in a banana republic. This was not something that you would expect to see in any civilized country with a government that believes in the law and the rule of law and all the rest of it. So, and of course, no evidence that relates to what you have explained so eloquently about what was going on in Ecuador and Stephen's work as a human rights lawyer was allowed, was admissible in evidence. Nothing, not a single word was spoken about Chevron, Texaco, Ecuador, indigenous people, oil spillage, cancer, deformities, dead children. None of that was allowed into court. So Stephen was convicted of this ridiculous, on this ridiculous charge. And the rest of his story starts from there. Everything changed at that moment. And he had to defend himself. Obviously, he appealed the decision, but the appellate court is by law not allowed to admit any evidence that hadn't been heard at the original trial. In consequence, the fact that Chevron's main witness in the RICO trial, a man called Guerra, lied through his effing teeth all the way through his testimony, quite obviously, but that's not allowed to be brought up in any appeal. All right. We'll leave all the legal stuff because Stephen and others know a lot more about that than I do. Things look pretty grim, I have to say, in 2014. Well, we're 6 years down the line now. And 6 years down the line, things are not looking quite so grim. If we'd done this 6 years ago, there'd be 2 bums on seats in living rooms across the United States of America interested in this webinar. There might be one other lawyer or 2 or 3 standing in Stephen's corner. Now, people have people have woken up, and this army, it's now a proper little, it's a small army, it's a guerrilla army, it's fighting against the whole weight of the Department of Justice, because the United States Department of Justice is heavily biased in favor of, guess what, corporations like the Chevron Corporation. So all the bluster of the lawyers who've been arguing the Chevron case, like the despicable Randy Mastro, who leads them, who I've watched in action with his horrid little smile. He's got a perfectly nice beard, but his smile is disgusting, have been able to get away with it. The billions of dollars they've thrown at the demonizing of Stephen Donziger had their effect. But people are seeing through it. The veil is lifted. And I can't tell you how happy I am about that. Okay, there's one thing that I wanted to do while I still have a little bit of time.
Roger, when you do, can you speak even a little bit louder for the last part?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can shout. So I beg your pardon. I'm going to shout now. All right. That was my picture of Kaplan. All right. I'm not sure what the date of the, yeah, I am. Just over a year, in March 2019, which is over a year ago now, I had just received a copy of a letter that one of our other panelists here today, Simon Taylor, had sent on behalf of Global Witness, which is a UK organization devoted to the legal protection of this fragile planet that we all call home, to the DOJ. And can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. And I read this letter and I thought it was extremely eloquent. I'm going to read you a little bit of my reply. I replied to Simon, okay, because I think it's important and because it tells you a bit more of how I feel. You sitting in your living room or wherever you are sitting. This is it. Dear Simon, my name is Roger Wars, blah, blah, I use blah, blah, phew, that's that out of the way. Yesterday, Stephen Donziger sent me a copy of your letter to the DOJ. What a great letter. You have no idea, Simon, how much Global Witness's support means to us. I won't dwell on detail, but your message to their honors vis-a-vis US judicial reputation is very well put. He explained to them that they were shooting themselves in the foot, that jurisprudence in the United States, generally over the world, has the reputation of actually applying the law and being relatively fair. And this case shows that that is a load of crap. It's bullshit. That's not what is happening in this country. So, as I said to Steve yesterday, yeah, let's hope it'll give them pause for thought in DC. As I said to Stephen yesterday, your letter gives me hope that maybe there is a tunnel and that maybe that tunnel is defined by the law and that just maybe there is a light at the end of that tunnel. I've been touring abroad for the last 2 years, and during that time, I had the opportunity to visit with some of our plaintiffs in Ecuador. I was deeply moved. I go back to North America in 2 weeks' time, and they expect to pick up the cudgels. I believe the next battle will be in the appellate court in Toronto. You have to remember this is last year, where we achieved some success in October 2017. We won't waste time crossing our fingers, and blang, blang, it goes on, but it does say this. We will be girded for the fray, gloves off. The future of global jurisprudence depends upon the outcome of this case. If Chevron win, it will be a green light for them and for their like to continue to destroy the earth and all life on it. If the people win, we, the people, may have a fighting chance to save this fragile planet for future generations. Just to know that you are there and care about the law, blah, 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 Simon. So that's from a year and a bit ago. But I speak truth. This case is so important. That's why it's so good that we're here today, standing shoulder to shoulder. That's why it's so good that you're sitting watching this webinar. That's why it's so good to know that this movement is going to grow exponentially from this point forward. Stephen, I'm sure later, is going to explain how the legal profession are beginning to join ranks with us to root out the evil of this corporate-owned, paid-for, criminal meting out of so-called justice by bought and paid for federal judges like Louis A. Kaplan and his cohort, Loretta Prescott. Maybe more about her later. All right, I'll give the floor to somebody else. I'm done. Thank you so much for tuning in, though.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much for your support for that presentation. And I know what the ongoing work that you will continue with us for as long as the fight needs you. One of the things that you brought home there was what it meant to be in the crosshairs of Chevron's attack as a lawyer. And now we want to turn over to Lauren Regan, the executive director of the Civil Liberties Defense Center, because Lauren has recently joined Stephen's legal team. Lauren is also part of a coalition called Protect the Protest, which is a group of human rights and environmental organizations that have come together to protect each other from corporate slap attacks and protect individuals who are expressing their freedom of speech and challenging corporations that are involved in illegal acts. So Lauren, could you talk to us about why you got involved in the case and what this means for other lawyers? Why, as Roger was just saying, this is a case that we cannot afford to lose and we have to work together to win.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. So when I first became a lawyer over 20 years ago, I did federal environmental law. I sued the federal government for illegal timber sales and Endangered Species Act violations and Clean Water Act violations. And often we would have corporations siding with government agencies fighting against us. And after the Patriot Act was passed, I started up the Civil Liberties Defense Center, and we defend activists all around the country, as well as suing police and government agencies for civil rights violations. A lot of the activists that we defend are environmental activists, and in the last several years, climate defenders in particular, and land defenders as well. And so for me, the reason that we got involved in Stephen's case is, as public interest lawyers, there are not enough of us. And we can easily become the targets of the corporations, because although there might be thousands of activists willing to put their bodies on the line, there is a much smaller number of people that can go into those jails as lawyers and can walk into the courtrooms and fight on behalf of those people against the corporations. And as Roger eloquently explained, the legal system and the court system has a lot of problems, especially the systemic injustice for poor and people of color that has only been exacerbated in recent times. But when corporations like Chevron and Exxon and Big Pharma, the tobacco industry, they learned that if they go after the few lawyers, then not only do they take their biggest adversaries away, the ones that can cause them the most economic harm in terms of court judgments and verdict like the one Stephen won, but it also will potentially scare away other lawyers and litigants. It chills the rights of people to be willing to go to the courts to seek justice for the harms that they suffer. So as a public interest lawyer, I felt it was absolutely imperative for myself and for other lawyers to stand in solidarity with Stephen, to make it very clear to the corporations that we are in solidarity with him, all for one, one for all, that if they go after one of us, they're coming after all of us. You know, the Martin Niemöller quote from long ago really got it right. And that quote is timeless. You know, first they'll come for one faction and they'll attempt to demonize that faction. But make no mistake, eventually they will come for you. And if you don't stand up with those that are being targeted in this way, then there will be no one to stand up for you when they come after you. And that's why my organization and myself have put our, our effort, our capacity behind this case. I think it's also important to emphasize that one of the goals of these corporate slap suits, like the type that started this whole debacle, number one, there's a huge power dynamic. As Paul mentioned, you have a multi-billion-dollar fossil fuel corporation and thousands of lawyers and millions of dollars going after a single public interest human rights lawyer who at some points represented himself because he couldn't afford lawyers. And that's why the legal team right now has also come together to defend Stephen pro bono. None of us are asking him to pay a dime. And in part, it's because in order to keep him out of jail, he had to come up with an $800,000 bond. He had to surrender his passport. He's been on house arrest for over a year, where he can't leave the confines of his apartment without permission. And he's worn a GPS tracking device on his ankle for over a year now, because he won a $9.5 billion judgment against a fossil fuel corporation. Make no mistake about that either, because the reality is that Stephen refused to turn over his computers and his devices in order to protect the Ecuadorian clients that had the strength and courage to come forward and litigate against this fossil fuel company. He's not going to give them up. He is standing in solidarity with them in refusing to turn these over to Kaplan, who wants to turn them over to Chevron, who then wants to use them to bully and basically scare other Ecuadorian and other indigenous communities from ever thinking about going after this industry again. That is their number one goal. That is why they've put so much time and effort into litigating against Stephen. Their goal is to make it so that no one will ever dare to take them to court again. So right now, we've got a trial date with regard to a criminal contempt case set for September. This is fairly unprecedented. Normally in civil litigation, if there is a dispute over discovery and whether someone has to turn attorney-client privileged information over to their adversary, it is appealed and the civil courts deal with it. But in this case, and likely because of many of the reasons that Roger mentioned, while Stephen was appealing the court ruling on having to turn his devices over, this judge made the unprecedented move of drafting and demanding that criminal charges be filed against him. He walked across the hall to the U.S. Attorney's office and told them that he wanted them to file these criminal charges. And to the U.S. Attorney's office credit, they declined to do it. Normally, that would be the end of the equation. If the prosecutors won't prosecute, that means there's something wrong with, what the judge is trying to maneuver. In this case, he went even further and he used an incredibly rarely used rule, and he appointed a private law firm to prosecute him in the shoes of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now we know that this private law firm, Seward and Kissel, has Chevron as a client and has worked in the fossil fuel industry that Chevron works in and profits from for a long time. But yet the court has refused to rule that they have a conflict of interest. So to take a step back, Chevron didn't get what they wanted out of the civil lawsuit. And even though the judge was clearly biased in their favor, they now have another private law firm that is one of their allies who is criminally prosecuting him with the threat of federal prison now hanging over his head. And even if he doesn't go to federal prison because we're going to win his case, he has spent a year in home detention. He has been a prisoner for over a year. And in all the cases that we've looked at regarding lawyers facing criminal contempt charges like this, the longest sentence any lawyer has ever served after going to trial and after being convicted was 90 days of house arrest. That means that Stephen has served over 4 times as long as any other lawyer, and he hasn't even had his day in court yet. So that's just an example of, some of the legal obstacles that we are facing. In over 20 years of doing this kind of law, I am constantly shaking my head and in disbelief at some of the court rulings and the way that things are just not going the way they normally go in a courtroom. And, and as I mentioned, we've defended Earth Liberation Front, we've defended many radical organizations that also normally are not getting a fair shake in court. There's a lot of bias. Prosecutors have extra zeal when going after a lot of the far left clients that we defend, but we've never seen to this extent. And we're talking about a public interest human rights lawyer here, someone who had no criminal activity on his record and has spent his life fighting for just causes. As Roger mentioned at the beginning, Chevron made it clear what their goals were in targeting Stephen Donziger. It was to demonize Donziger and to make sure that no other lawyer would stand in Stephen's shoes and pick up the pieces of this case and seek enforcement of the judgment. And by stringing him through the legal system and now having him in home detention for over a year, they have made it so that he and his colleagues have not been able to enforce this legal judgment that's been upheld in over 6 international courts around the world. And their goal is to drag this process out as long as possible so that they don't have to pay for the harms that they've caused to the Ecuadorian people who, remain poisoned and suffering from the harms that Chevron profited from. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I think that it's really important people understand, as you pointed out, this is not just about one lawyer. This affects all of us. And what we've seen as Amazon Watch over the last 20 years is that it's proven true so frighteningly in this case, because people, for example, who wrote one blog about this case years ago have found themselves issued subpoenas to turn over all of their emails because they wrote one blog about Chevron during the course of this case. So you could be, if you've tweeted about it, you could be in Chevron's crosshairs, and that's terrifying. This also obviously isn't just about what's happening in the United States. And that's part of the reason we wanted to ask Simon Taylor from Global Witness, one of the founders of Global Witness, to join us today to discuss his perspective on the case. Global Witness has been supportive. As you heard, they wrote to the Department of Justice. If you write questions, we're going to try to get to those questions later. I will try to answer some in text and we'll talk about them later, but some people are asking specifically about the DOJ and what could be done there. Simon, maybe you could talk about that work that Global Witness has done, but also what you see from your perspective and your organization's perspective, this means for civil rights in the United States, human rights in the United States, and questions of corruption, really, to be frank.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who come first. I'll try and live up to that. Just one word of warning quickly before I go. My internet broadband width is sort of questionable sometimes. So if you start not hearing me, someone ping me a message and I'll cut the camera because it might work better then. So yeah, I'll try and be quick. So I've known Stephen, I don't know, 4.5, 5 years. I've known you from afar for much longer than that, Stephen. I think I've probably first clocked your work on this case pre the case going to Ecuador. But you know, to my great regret, I didn't you know, end up in contact and get engaged earlier. But ever since I've met you, I've sort of slowly over time, with time permitted, gone through various you know, documentations that have come out of the different court cases and so on. And as I've understood more and read more, I think it's fair to say I've become more and more, what's an appropriate term, utterly disgusted by what's going on. So just a little bit about me. I've spent 23 years now, roughly, looking at malfeasance, corruption, the looting of states, the funding of conflicts, and so on and so forth, all over the world, associated with the extractive sector. Most of that work's been on oil and gas companies. Most of it's more oil than gas, I would say. Just to give you a reference point to go on, even the OECD, in a study a few years ago of a number of sectors looking at grand corruption, really big scale corruption involving top level officials in companies, they looked at 4 sectors, and the sector they found to be engaged with in the most corruption was the extractive sector. And certainly from my experience, I'd put oil and gas at the top of that pile. So that's sort of my background. Much of what we've done has been to investigate and expose such corruption and the mechanisms by which companies do this, including hopefully exposing the individuals involved. We've also worked on policy areas. So for my sins, I'm the co-founder also of the Publish What You Pay campaign, which has sought to bring transparency around the financial arrangements of the sector. I won't go into that here, it's a long conversation. Another key bit we've worked, which is more relevant, has been trying to hold people to account. Some of you may have observed or noted in press reports about the trial of Shell and Eni in Milan at the moment for a corruption scam in Nigeria. That's almost coming to an end, where highest level executives are on trial. We, together with our 3 other NGO colleagues in different organizations, were the complainants. We filed the criminal complaint before the Milan public prosecutor, and he went ahead and did a substantial investigation, and that's the reason why this is a trial going. So a lot of what we've been trying to do is hold these individuals to account, and we've been doing that on and off in different ways for probably much of those 23 years. And in doing that, I've frequently been either sort of engaged with, discussing things, feeding information to, or generally observing and noting the Southern District of New York in particular. And I think in the sort of global scheme of things, the Southern District has a reputation of being the sort of jurisdictional domicile most prevalent in the fight against the grand corrupt of the world. And so I put this in this context. This case stinks, and it is like a massive festering corpse, I apologize for the language, sitting on the reputation of the Southern District. There is something altogether completely wrong about the way this case has run itself. All the way, you've heard various bits of it. I won't go into that. I'm not a lawyer, but from the RICO case to the bar grievance hearing that eventually Stephen was allowed to put his side of the story. As I understand it, the first time, Stephen, you've been able to say your side of the story in 10 years, which I found particularly shocking. If it wasn't for what I felt was a very fair-minded adjudicator, frankly, the rest of that process and the very existence of it, I would classify as a kangaroo court. It was profoundly shocking. So I spent some time there and indeed spoke at that. And now we've got this criminal contempt thing. And I don't know if anyone else is shocked by this. The whole issue of conflict and the prosecuting company that was just referred to, and how they're conflicted out by being a company that has done business with Chevron. They tried, as I understand it, to cover this up for 8 months. How on earth was it okay by Judge Preska to do that? Why was that acceptable? When I think of the efforts we try to get lawyers to represent us, even the sniff of having worked for the oil sector before generally disqualifies them under conflict rules. And here we have a company that is acting as a public prosecutor in the Southern District of, as we've heard of Stephen and his clients, the victims of Chevron's pollution, that work directly with Chevron. If that's not a corrupt arrangement, I'd like to know what is. And the justification they've used, which I understand has so far been accepted by the court, is, oh, this is a attorney-client privilege. I mean, isn't that extraordinary? Here we have Stephen in contempt of court for exercising attorney-client privilege, and the people prosecuting him are refusing to disclose the fact that they're conflicted by justifying it on the basis of attorney-client privilege. If that's not 1984, I'd like to know what is. So I guess I have a rather sort of shocked message, I suppose. Maybe I'm too naive for this game, but in the last 23 years, we as an organization have looked to the United States and also to Europe and some other locations as the jurisdiction where you can get some semblance of governance, accountability, oversight, as locations where the poor and dispossessed have some time in court. It's hard. We've heard all sorts of counter examples where that's not the case, but these jurisdictions have been places where people can get, some kind of relief. And so, but I feel that is rapidly slipping. So what's at stake here really is, is the United States, as I wrote in that letter that Roger referred to, basically behaving like any myriad banana republic that we have documented before? Or does it hold itself up as the country of the rule of law, everyone equal before the law? And frankly, at the moment, with the behavior of Judge Kaplan, he conducted his courtroom, which is well documented, and in the way the case is going right now, with Stephen right now in the criminal contempt case, I would say we're very firmly in the banana republic space. And I think most people would find that in the United States that I've ever worked with completely unacceptable. So I hope you're as outraged as I am. I think maybe I'll stop with that because we want to get on to some of the actions and others have more to say about that. So I don't want to take any more time. I'm very happy to answer questions if people want to stay on, but that's my view. In summing up, I'm absolutely disgusted by what's going on. And I think the message to both judges is we and an army of us are watching you and we are not going away. So you need to really think about how you conduct this. And if you claim that this is a rule of law, you better follow the law because otherwise we will find out and expose you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simon. Thanks for your work and for Global Witness's work on this case. It's really important for people to recognize that this is drawing the attention of the international community and exposing the ridiculous degree to which the fossil fuel industry has sway and control over our government, and in this case, our courts. The European Parliament, members of the European Parliament recently sent a letter to members of the US Congress. And that brings me quickly, before we go to Stephen, to the action that has just been launched today to ask people to support that. So there is the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission and the Subcommittee on Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. They received a letter from the European Parliament a few weeks ago because of what's happened to Stephen, because of the threat to the rights, his rights and the rights of other lawyers to work on these kinds of cases, asking them to investigate. So what we're asking everyone to do is go to makechevroncleanup.com or to amazonwatch.org, fill out that action, send your message to the members of those commissions on the backs of that European Parliament letter saying, we encourage you to respond to this letter and investigate. At this point, we've got the judiciary acting as the executive branch by prosecuting a lawyer and unfairly imprisoning him before trial, as you heard from Lauren, to a degree that's never happened before. It's time for Congress to step in and take action and provide some actual oversight to this and protect the rights of Stephen and others like him. So please go to either makechevroncleanup.com, amazonwatch.org, take that action as soon as you can, and then you will get more information on the next step of action because there will be something following that next very shortly. The pressure has continued to mount. More and more, 29 Nobel laureates, artists, activists, organizations, we are all finally coming together to recognize the massive threat that Chevron poses to our environment, to our human rights, and to our judicial system. So let's continue putting that pressure together. And then Lastly, let's turn over to Stephen. I apologize, we're running a little behind schedule. We may go a little bit over the hour. Please stay with us if you can. The Zoom isn't going to end automatically when we reach the hour. So we want to hear from Stephen, and then we want to try to get to some of your questions if we haven't answered them in the chat. Stephen, happy anniversary. It's been 1 year. I saw you in New York about a year ago, and I can't believe that we're here a year later and that you're still under house arrest. I was shocked when it happened, and I thought this can't go on for a month, let alone a year, but here we are. But in that year, and you and I have spoken a lot, so much has happened to actually turn this against them. I mean, I think this was the dumbest thing that they ever did, Preska, Kaplan, and Chevron, because look at what we've brought together now. So please talk to us about what this last year has been like, who has come out, and what you see coming next so that people can stay engaged in this fight and support you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone who's participated today, the speakers and people listening. You know, look, I am just shocked and appalled that this has gone on for a year. I'm shocked it started even one day. There's never been a lawyer in the history of our country who's been held even a minute pre-trial on a criminal contempt charge, and I've been held now a year. And part of what they're doing is denying me yet again a jury of impartial fact finders. And if this trial that Lauren mentioned actually happens in September, it will be a grossly unfair trial that will certainly result in my conviction. For various reasons I'll explain. But this year has been, you know, extraordinary. First of all, I could not, and my family could not, my son and my wife, Laura, my son, Matthew, could not have survived without the support of everybody. While my physical world has shrunk dramatically, my spiritual and solidarity world has broadened 10 times as dramatically. My life prior to this involved a lot of international travel, trying to help my clients in Ecuador. And now I've been in my apartment, and in many ways, I feel like we've accomplished more out of here in the last year than, you know, I might have accomplished traveling. That said, it's a terrible ordeal to have your freedom taken away, particularly under these circumstances. You know, I've worked for 27 years for people in Ecuador. I have the honor and privilege of working for them. This is not my case, it's their case. They have confidence in me enough so I can be their lawyer or representative, and I've been really enjoyed the work through the years. And it makes me so sad that their lawyer has been attacked this way. And they've really been deprived of me, or a good part of me, by virtue of me being locked up. I've been to Ecuador 250 times over the last 20 years. I'm fortunate enough to have really deep, enriching relationships with people in the Amazon, as well as people in New York, and lawyers and donors, investors. I'm so fortunate to have the relationships that I do. You know, listening to these presentations, Roger has just totally been there for the Ecuadorians and for me and others, and Lauren, Simon, Paul, many others, Aaron Page, Bill and Lynn Twist put up a good portion of their house for my bail. Otherwise, I would have been in jail maybe this past year. My bail, by the way, is higher than 3 of the 4 officers who killed George Floyd. There's something very, very wrong about how I'm being treated, but before I get to the details of that, I want to just say that ultimately this is about the people of Ecuador who have suffered for decades, living in probably the worst oil-related pollution on earth. It's called the Amazon Chernobyl. There are 1,000 open-air toxic waste pits that have not been properly remediated, that were built by Texaco, that Chevron now owns, that are still there. Most of these were built in the 1970s and 1980s, and they can still contaminate the groundwater, the rivers and the streams, the food, the air, almost every aspect of daily life. These are people, the indigenous groups, who have relied on their natural environment for millennia and lived prosperously. They're not like us. They don't need money to be happy and to live in a healthy, prosperous way. And this pollution has completely disrupted their cultures. They can no longer sustain their traditional lifestyles in the way that they had because of the oil contamination caused by Chevron, Texaco and Chevron. And the devastating impacts on our world from this pollution, meaning the environment, the indigenous culture, the individual lives. Thousands of people have died of cancer with no treatment. Really should be a wake-up call for the entire world. And I am shocked that the big media in our country have not covered this story more. And we have to get attention shined on the people who continue to suffer. And this is so much bigger than me. I also want to emphasize there's many other lawyers working on this. I believe I will get through this with the support of everybody, but this case will go on with or without me, whether I'm detained or not. And that's what Chevron's really scared of. Chevron's scared. Chevron is scared. Why else would they risk taking such an extreme measure as to locking up a successful human rights lawyer who helped his clients, along with many other lawyers, win one of the largest environmental judgments ever? They are scared. They know there is major risk. They know there are a lot of lawyers working on this, and they know the people of Ecuador deserve to be paid the compensation ordered by the court, which, by the way, is modest and is about 1/6 the amount that BP has paid for the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, which was an accident. This was deliberate. But because it's in Ecuador, the US justice system, or at least the judges that have been talked about earlier, don't seem to want to apply the rule of law. And the attacks on me are ferocious, and I'm not gonna lie, it's unnerving. I'm really strong and resilient, but it's unnerving. I don't know where this is heading. It's dark. As Roger and Simon and Lauren, it's dark. And you know, we're fighting hard. And I'm so appreciative, by the way, of all the lawyers who are helping me, Lauren, and God, there's so many, Aaron, Jeannie Meir, Rick Friedman, professors from Harvard, Charlie Nesson, David Rosenberg. I'm sorry, I'm excluding people, but there's probably 15 lawyers now who have come together to try to get this dealt with. And we're going on the attack. I've had it, sitting here in my apartment for 12 months, unlike any other lawyer in US history. There's something kind of sinister going on in our society to some degree, right? Last couple of years, attacks on the rule of law, the likes of which we've never seen before from our own Department of Justice. I put what's happening to me squarely in that unfortunate trend in our society. And I'm really, and I think we all should be disturbed by this, because this is about indigenous groups in Ecuador, but it's also about protecting our democracy and the rule of law in our society. And I'll end, because I know we want to go to questions, by saying life for the last year, I'm amazed at our ability to create a degree of happiness in the confines of our apartment, despite the detention. We wake up every day and fight, and we create familial unity. And they want me, and they want us to be depressed, sad, demoralized. They want me to really spend my days moving from one side of my couch to the other. And by the way, I often do that, but I'm working when I'm moving. And we're not going to let them do that. You know, I'm personally determined to get through this. I think ultimately we're on the right track. Paul mentioned this is a bit of an overreach. There are so many more people following this now as a result of my detention that did not pay attention to it before. And our goal today, besides learning about the case, is to harness that energy and build an even bigger global movement with the help of people like Roger and Lauren and Simon, Paul, and everyone else on this call. So these judges who seem hell-bent on protecting Chevron at the expense of justice start to understand that they are being exposed and they are looking bad, such that they will do their jobs properly and rule as they should based on facts and law and not based on what's an obvious desire, really led by Judge Kaplan, to protect Chevron's money at the expense of legitimate legal rulings out of Ecuador and Canada that have validated the judgment based on extensive evidence, 100 technical reports, tens of thousands of sampling results, all the evidence that Kaplan would not let into his courtroom when he tried me without a jury based on false evidence, largely false evidence produced by a Chevron witness paid $2 million. So you haven't heard the end of this story. We're on the march. There's going to be many more actions in the coming weeks, but the key is support, public outcry. Elected leaders need to start paying attention to this. And the actions that Paul outlined need to be taken. Please go to the website, makechevroncleanup.com. It's on the page there. You can sign the action and then keep going back, and we'll notify you when there's actions in the future. But I just want to close by thanking again everybody. Could not do this without solidarity. You know, I've never understood solidarity to the extent I do now when I really need it. And, you know, that's what this is all about. We're all in it for each other. And Lauren is so right that, you know, they want this to be the new playbook. If they can do this to me, they will do it to others. Worse, others won't step up out of fear they will do it to them. I mean, this is an intimidation model of litigation and harassment through the law or through the abuse of the law. And as peaceful people, as people who believe in the rule of law and democracy, we must do all we can to become aware of it and to stop it. Thank you so much to everybody. Love you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for your sacrifice and your work. I know after being, you know, in working closely with you this last year, how much this has controlled and dominated your life. And every waking and sleeping minute, you're aware that you've got this ankle bracelet. And it's an unbelievable outrage that after winning this case, this is what you've had to go through. And I want to remind people that this isn't just an informational webinar, like Stephen said. We need you. This is the reason that the only way we can fight back is because, as Roger once said before, we have the numbers, we have the people. They have weaponized the judicial system against the Ecuadorian people, against Stephen, against those who have supported Stephen. And it is being perverted and used unfairly. And the only way to fight back is if we have the numbers to stand up and say no. When they see that people are taking those actions, obviously we can't be in the streets right now, but when we can, we will be. And there are other ways to let them know that we're watching. So this is, as Stephen said, a meeting to build that movement, to continue that growth. Please don't leave this without taking that action and committing to telling 3 or 4 other people about what you heard. Show them the link to the webinar, show them anything to get them engaged in this case. This is the story that Chevron has suppressed for years, the largest oil-related environmental crime in history, and many people don't know about it because it happened in Ecuador, thousands of miles away. If it had happened in California, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So please take that step. We actually have answered a bunch of questions already through the Q&A. If you have another one, we have a couple minutes, please do type it into there. There have been a lot of links posted in the chat, all the websites that you can go to take action, Twitter handles that you can follow to stay updated on the case. As Lauren mentioned, We're looking at a trial date in September, and we want to make sure that the public is able to witness what goes on there. So we're going to need to be organizing to press the court to make sure that there will be a live stream of that, something that Chevron really doesn't want. And if you get engaged in this case and start to see pushback from either Chevron or the people they've hired, the PR firms, the lawyers, come to us and we will provide you the information to dismiss the lies that they will throw at you to say, this is a case of corruption, this was a fabrication, this was a conspiracy, all the lies that they throw out to their own shareholders and to the press. Reach back out, get on our list, and you'll find out what you need to know to be able to strike back against those kinds of things. There is a need to raise money, somebody just posted. As Stephen mentioned, he is raising funds for his legal defense. That's donzingerdefense.com. There's a link to that too. I don't have a link to the request for the live stream in Stephen's case, but if you sign the action that we're asking now, you will be added to the list. And when we get that next action, and if it is, here's the link for the court, then you'll be able to take that. That's why it's so critical that you sign up and get those updates. So somebody asked about that. Another person just thanked you, Stephen, for your bravery and honor in the fight. And there are multiple radio stations and podcasts that have been asked to connect with you to get you on, which is fantastic. Any one of the people here can be a spokesperson and is ready and willing to give their time to talk more about this case. So if you email paz@amazonwatch.org, that's my email, Paul Pasimino, I will direct it to the right person if you don't know who else to get in touch with. I can put you in touch with Lauren or Simon, anybody who you need to request an interview for.
Can I mention something super quick about the trial?
Yes, please.
Real quick. So right now my trial is scheduled for September 9th with no jury, with a judge, the same judge who's locked me up for 12 months on what I believe are false pretenses. That's my judge with no jury. She will convict me no matter what we do or say if that trial happens on September 9th. We have filed a motion to postpone the trial for various reasons, including that we have a pending emergency motion on the appellate court to dismiss the entire case. We don't think there should be a trial. We think this should end and the case should be dismissed because of prosecutorial misconduct and judicial misconduct, meaning that I'm being prosecuted by a Chevron law firm. That's never happened before. Usually those who prosecute are the regular prosecutor's office. But as Lauren said, that office rejected the case. So Judge Kaplan appointed what he knew was a Chevron law firm to seek my detention and prosecute me. We think those are grounds for not only a dismissal of the case, but sanctions on those involved in setting up this rigged system. However, if the trial does happen, right now we're trying to get it stayed, and it's unclear whether it will be. There's also, by the way, the pandemic. There are no trials going on in New York right now. It would be kind of extraordinary that the one trial that happens is my misdemeanor case. And it shows you how political this has become to the judges, Kaplan and Preska, who are behind it. It'd be very ironic if the first trial is the Steve Donziger misdemeanor case. So it's very possible this case will either be dismissed or delayed. If it's not, though, on September 9th, I'm going to need all the support I can get, both in court and via Zoom. I don't know what this trial will even look like. There's all sorts of issues related to my right to defend myself if it's via Zoom. I can't confront witnesses. I can't properly consult with my lawyer. They're already trying to claim I'm not entitled to all of my pro bono lawyers. I have 4 of them. And they're saying, 2 of them don't need to appear because they're old. For my lawyers to come and appear, they would have to come 14 days before in quarantine. These are pro bono lawyers and sit in a hotel for 14 days. It's being set up once again, just like Judge Kaplan did in the underlying RICO case, to compromise my rights and the rights of my clients. So this trial, if it happens September 9th, will not be fair. I will be convicted. We will, if it does happen, still defend the hell out of myself. We will put in evidence to the extent we're allowed, and we will fight. If the trial doesn't happen, we still have an enormous fight to get through this. So keep September 9th on your calendars, and we'll keep you posted about how things unfold.
Thank you so much. I apologize for going over a little bit. I think this is critically important. I want to thank all the panelists and to give you one opportunity if there's a final word that you'd like to add into this before we just put up a final slide and say farewell and hopefully talk to you soon to all the people that have joined the webinar. Is there anyone who wants to chime in with one? Roger, yeah.
Right. There she is. Judge Loretta Preska. You've heard the story in your living rooms today. She is party to all of the information, every single word that you've heard this afternoon. Judge Loretta Preska has heard. Why hasn't she dismissed this case? Why hasn't she gone round to Stephen's apartment on the Upper West Side and said, excuse me, Mr. Donziger, can I have the ankle bracelet? And I'm very sorry. Well, we all know why, because she's a nodding dog on the back shelf of Louis A. Kaplan's Cadillac. And she should be ashamed of herself. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Roger. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much to everybody. We're really happy to see the participation. We got so many people, hundreds of people, way more than we could fit on the Zoom. So there are many, many more people watching on Facebook Live and on YouTube. And we will, if you take those actions that you see on the screen, you will get more information on how you can stay involved in this case and stick with us until there's actual justice, till Stephen is freed, till Chevron is paid to clean up, until the people who have perpetrated this crime against humanity have been held to account for what they've done. Thank you so much for your time today, and stay in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.